Good evening. I'm Ann Huang, Executive Director of World Arts West. Tonight, we're partnering with Dance USA to bring you the workshop you have been asking for: how to catalog, organize, archive, and share those wonderful dance photos and videos in your possession. Our esteemed speakers include Imogen Smith, Dance USA's Director of Archiving and Preservation; Hallie Chametzky, Dance USA's Archiving Specialist; and our special guest, Shipra Shukla, who has done extensive archiving work with Chitresh Dance Company and Chhandam School of Kathak. If you like what you see tonight, please make a donation to World Arts West so we can continue bringing these programs to you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Imogen Smith.
Thank you, Anne. It's really an honor for us to be partnering with World Arts West, and I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. As Anne mentioned, I'm Imogen Smith. I'm the Director of Archiving and Preservation with Dance USA. I use the pronouns she, her, and I am coming to you tonight from the lands of the Munsee, Lenape, and Canarsie peoples in Queens, New York. The mission of Dance USA's Archiving and Preservation program is to help the dance field preserve and share its legacy. We offer services, resources, and education to artists and organizations. For this workshop, we've chosen to focus on just one subject: organizing and protecting your digital files. We know that right now, especially during the pandemic, probably a lot of what you're creating is digital. And this has advantages, but also its own challenges. I'm going to start off with some basic tips and talk about how to name and organize your files. My colleague Hallie will talk about security and storage for files. And finally, we'll hear from Shipra Shukla with the story of her archive project at Chhandam. We will share our slides with you and also share a link to the recording. So please don't feel you need to write down everything now, but do write down your questions so that you can ask us at the end. I know that when you hear the word archiving, it can seem overwhelming and daunting. You may feel that you don't have the time, the space, the staff, or the knowledge to do this. What we want to share with you tonight are some very simple steps you can take to ensure that your digital assets are well organized and safe. Whatever stage you're at in your work, you can benefit from these practices. They will both save you time today and streamline your processes so you can work more efficiently, and also ensure that your legacy is preserved for the future. Don't worry if you can't tackle everything at once. Small steps can make a big difference, and doing something is always better than doing nothing. So just keep at it. And don't feel that you need to struggle through this alone. You can learn from your peers who are doing similar work. You can use the free resources that we're going to share with you today. And also you can reach out to Dance USA, and we are always happy to talk with you about your archiving questions. So let's imagine that your organization or you yourself have a dance performance or an event. You take a bunch of photos on your phone or your digital camera, and someone else emails you a video file of the event. What do you do now? Here's an overview of the steps that you should take. First, you need to get those files off whatever device or out of your email inbox and save them securely. You probably want to rename the files, and you definitely want to save those files in a folder structure so that they are easy to find when you want them again. And lastly, you want to save multiple copies of them in different places and make sure that you are backing up your data. I'm going to talk first about naming the files and creating a folder structure, and then Hallie will talk about storage options and other tips for keeping your stuff secure. When you create a new digital file, whether it's a photo or a video, it will be automatically assigned a name by the device. We've all seen these kind of IMG001 sort of names that you get with the photos on your phone. And these, especially in the case of video, these names do contain some information. They may tell you when the video was taken and the length, but this is probably not the most useful name for trying to find something later because it doesn't give you a lot of information. And these names all look very much the same. So you probably want to rename the file first thing. Naming photo and video files is especially important because unlike a text document, you can't necessarily tell what things are just by looking at them. If you put key information about the item into the file name, you can make sure that information lives with the item and it won't get lost. It's just like writing on the back of a photo or on a videotape label in the old days. So ideally, the name should tell you the date that the photo or the video was created, what the work or event was, the location, the photographer, and then because you quite likely will have multiple images or videos that are similar, you want to give it a number in the series. It's very, very important with your file names that they be unique, that you're not giving it a name that's too similar to something else. So here's an example at the bottom that has the date, the year, the name of the work, the venue, the photographer, and it's the fourth name in the series. It's very important to name files the same way every time. So what you want to do is establish a consistent, clear, and meaningful system for naming your files. You should actually write this system down so that not only you, but any of your staff or colleagues or people you work with, volunteers or interns can all use the same system and understand what the names mean. The time that you take now to think about a good system will save you time in the future when you don't have to think about it every time you're naming a file, and you don't have to spend so much time hunting for your files and opening multiple files because the titles aren't clear. It's also very important to use what we call in archiving a controlled vocabulary. And that simply means that every time you refer to a person, a title of a work, a venue, or a date, you use exactly the same terms, the same version of that name. And you are always using the same consistent terms to refer to drafts or edits or master copies or things like that. Here are some examples of what we mean by a controlled vocabulary. You may recognize that you sometimes use different forms of dates or names. Sometimes you abbreviate things, sometimes you don't. You know, do you put the year first or write out the month or put the number? All of these things, if you use inconsistent versions, things don't file together. It's not as easy to search for what you need because things are all in different places. Once you name your file, you also need to store it in the right place so that it's easy to find when you want to look for it again. This is where having a good file structure comes in handy. Just like in the old days, you would organize things in folders in a file cabinet, you want your digital folders to be working well for you so that you don't waste a lot of time hunting for things. The difference is that while you might have had one file cabinet in your office, now people tend to have, every individual has things on their own computer. Everybody organizes their files differently. So if everyone in your organization is actually using the same file structure, then it's easy to find things even if somebody leaves and you need to access their files. We've probably all had the experience of trying to find something in somebody else's files. It's an interesting glimpse into how their minds work, but it can be very difficult to know where they've put things if everybody is using their own different system. You probably already have some kind of file structure that you're using. The question is this working well for you? To develop a structure or improve your existing structure, think about what are your pain points? What are the times that you're actually finding it difficult to know where to store things or where to look for things? And think about how you and your colleagues use your files. What are the most common reasons why you're going to look for something? And so what would be the first thing you would think of to go and look for? And that's where you want to store it. Build your system around what feels natural to you and aligns with your mission and activities and the structure of your organization. Here is a sample. This is just a model, so don't feel the need to do it this way, but this shows you how you might create broad categories. You have your creative or artistic, educational, financial, marketing, and then you want to break things down within these categories by year, by type of material, and then finally you get down to the individual items, and here are your photos from that event, and they're renamed, they're stored under photos, they're in the correct year, and they're in your creative materials folder. The question of what you should be saving is also important. Can we move to the next slide, Sonia? Thank you. The digital revolution means that you probably now create and accumulate a lot more documents of your work, especially things like photos than you used to if you were still working before the digital age. And this can seem really overwhelming. So how do you decide what you should be saving and what really belongs in your archive? What has permanent value? You don't need to keep literally every document that crosses your path, but you also really want to be cautious about discarding things just to save space. Taking some time to establish broad goals for what you want to save and thinking about the value of different types of documents will ensure that the legacy of your work is preserved. We're mainly focusing today on the how-to of archiving, but it is always important to keep the why in mind. Why are you doing this, and what is the value? So when you're thinking about what gets saved, think about how a particular item might tell the story of your organization and whether it relates to your core mission. Everyone likes to have high-quality video to use for marketing or engagement, but video that might not be the best in terms of visual quality or camera work might still have archival value. For instance, that single camera back of the house shoot, or even just something that someone took on their phone in a rehearsal can still be very helpful for restaging, even if it doesn't look pretty and maybe it's not what you want to share publicly. Multiple shoots from the same performance can show different perspectives, which could be useful for restagings. Also think about the fact that materials that don't document performances, for instance, photos from parties or galas or your tours, those can shed light on the culture and personalities at your organization. Financial and grant documents. You don't need to keep all financial documents forever. There are legal requirements about how long you need to keep certain things, but they also can tell the story of how your organization has grown and changed over time, or how you've managed to produce your work. So ask yourself, what might a future researcher be able to learn from this? How might you yourself might want to use it or refer to it in the future? Archives can be used in a lot of different ways. They can inspire new creative work. They can be used in exhibitions, which could be digital or physical. They can help future researchers and students understand not only your own work, but also the broader stories and contexts that it was connected to. So while archiving can seem like a lot of effort, the payoff will be that you'll be able to make much fuller use of your records, and you'll know that your story is not going to be lost. So I know we're going to cover a lot of materials quickly in this webinar, and there are a lot of other things we can't get to. So I want you to know that there are resources that can help guide your process. The Artist's Legacy Toolkit is a free guide on Dance USA's website, which covers all aspects of archiving physical materials and digital materials. There is a whole section on records management, which is really what we're talking about tonight, and a section on digital files and preservation. There are examples of file structures and file naming guides in the toolkit. There are also tools that you can actually download and use, such as templates and spreadsheets, to start creating inventories or having tips on how to describe your materials. So I encourage you to take a look and browse through and see what there is here. And of course, contact us if you have any questions. Finally, here are just some tips for success. It can be a great idea to create a manual that explains things like your file naming system or your file structure, so that when you bring on new staff or you have volunteers or interns working with you, you can make sure that everyone is sticking to the same system. Doesn't need to be anything fancy, just write down and explain what you're doing, and this will likely be a living document. The key is really consistency and sticking to the system. Often we're in a hurry and we don't properly name or store something at the time. You think I'll do it later, but try to make it a habit, because cleaning up files later is always more time consuming and difficult than doing it in the moment. This is another take time to save time. If you take anything away from this, it should be that your systems should be clear and simple and align with the way your organization already uses and looks for records. Overly elaborate systems are harder to maintain because there's more effort involved, and it's also easier to make mistakes. A system that aligns with your mission and your values will stick. If it doesn't feel right or it doesn't match what you do or your core values, it's not going to last. And finally, those tools in the toolkit can really help to make your life easier. So don't feel the need to reinvent the wheel. Learn from what other people have done. Now, Hallie is going to talk to you about how to make sure that your digital files and online content are safely preserved for the future.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Imogen, and thank you, World Arts West, for having us. My name is Hallie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in today from the lands of the Munsee Lenape and the Wapengere here in East Harlem, New York City. So I would like to get started today just by talking a bit about digital files in general. So a lot of us might have this sense that once a file is digital, it's on our computer, or maybe it's on a social media account, that it's 100% safe and we can't lose it. This is actually not the case. Digital files do disappear, and some of you may have some unfortunate experience with this yourselves. But the good news is that there are plenty of things that you can do to keep your digital files safe and decrease the odds that you're going to lose them. So the first thing I'll talk about is social media. So social media pages are actually not an archive. A lot of people feel like by putting their content on the internet or out on social media, it's just safe forever, and it's really not. Things can just disappear, things can get taken down by the social media service, and you would just end up with no way to access it, which is really unfortunate. So one simple thing you can do to avoid losing social media posts is just to save them. So if not all of your social media posts, if that sounds like incredibly overwhelming and you're not sure you can do it, just the social media posts that relate to the broader aspect of your organization or your individual mission and operations. So a couple easy ways to save a social media post is just to take a screenshot, which is a totally fine way to do it, or make a PDF if that's a system that you're familiar with. You just want to make sure that you are continuing to use your file structure and file naming systems that Imogen just talked about for saving those social media posts. And you'll see here an example of an Instagram post from those photos that Imogen talked about earlier. Here, I just took a screenshot of my Instagram post, and you'll see an example underneath it of how I could have named that screenshot so that I could easily find it in my files. So, moving on to broader ideas around what we call digital preservation. You want to do everything you can to avoid the worst case scenario, which is that you lose important stuff because your hard drive crashes or your server crashes or you have some other digital disaster. So the archive's motto that we like to say is LOCKS, which stands for lots of copies keeps stuff safe. So to break that down a bit, we want you to have more than one copy of your important files. At the very least, have 2 backups in 2 separate places. This could look like 2 external hard drives, or maybe 1 hard drive and 1 cloud storage. And don't worry, we will talk more about what these things are in a second. In a perfect world, you would actually have 3 copies, 2 which are never edited or touched or manipulated, and 1 that would be your use copy for sort of day-to-day functions, like making copies of files or sending them to other people. If this is impossible for you, having 3 copies, try to have 2 and have 1 that's a use copy and 1 that's untouched and unedited. So before we move on, I just want to do a little PSA. This conversation is going to cover quite a few tech topics. So we're going to talk about hard drives, we're going to talk about cloud storage, we're even going to talk about automatic backups. So if this sounds overwhelming to you, don't feel you need to struggle through it alone. If anything that I cover today is overwhelming or confusing, or just beyond your computer and tech understanding of the world, I encourage you to reach out to that person in your life, whether it's a friend, a family member, a coworker, whoever it may be, who you go to for computer stuff. I feel like we all have that person who knows a little more about computers than us, and I want you to feel encouraged to reach out if you're feeling overwhelmed. So let's talk first about external hard drives. So you may be familiar with external hard drives already. They look like this most of the time. I've put in some pictures of them. And they're a really good way to store a large amount of material and to back up your files so that they live somewhere other than just on your computer. So there are so many hard drives out there that you can purchase. It's really difficult to recommend one brand or type specifically, but there are some things to just keep in mind if you decide that you do want to back up your files onto a hard drive. So first, you want to think about size. Think about how much data you have right now on your computer and how much you think you're going to grow that amount. So don't get a hard drive that's exactly the amount of space that you have right now if you think you're going to grow, because you'll run out and have to get a new hard drive. Think about compatibility with devices you use. So if you're a Mac user or a PC user, or if you have an organization with more than one employee and people use different devices, you should be able to check when you purchase it whether it's compatible with those. Do think about price. They range quite a bit in price, and you want to think about an investment you're making for about a 5 to 7 year investment in one hard drive. And it's something that's really important for the security of your files, so you'll want to balance those things. Think about portability. Most hard drives are portable these days, but some are less portable than others, so think about whether that's important to you. And then, like everything else you buy these days, you can look up customer reviews on the internet, and those are a good place to start. So let's talk a bit more about hard drives. So they can seem a little overly complicated sometimes when you look at them online. Remember that for your needs, you probably don't need a super complicated hard drive. A simple external hard drive, which is big enough for your files, is going to work just fine for you, I promise. And something to know if you are going to invest in a hard drive or two, they all are slightly different in terms of the setup process. So some you may be able to just take out of the box, plug in, and roll with it right away. Others need to go through a process which is called formatting, which is essentially teaching your computer and your hard drive how to talk to each other. It should come with instructions on how to do this. But again, if you're overwhelmed or confused by it, don't muddle through it too much alone, because sometimes muddling through it with tech stuff can mess things up more. So make sure you ask someone for help or search for online instructions if you're confused. So another thing to know about hard drives is you do have to put in a little bit of effort to keep them healthy. Just like I said earlier, digital files are not automatically secure, so you will have to check on them. You want to check on them frequently. I would say at the very least once per year. You want to look and make sure everything's okay. You know, you can see your files and everything, probably more often than that, but at the very least once per year. And even if they seem like they're functioning pretty well, they're healthy, they're chugging along, you do want to plan on changing them out about every 5 to 7 years, just because that's about the time when you might be risking a crash if you keep it much longer. So that is all to say that hard drives do crash. So some of you, again, may have experience with this. It can be pretty tragic. But there are some signs ahead of time that might give you a hint that your hard drive's going to crash. So basically, it's anything really strange. If your computer stops recognizing it when you plug it in, if it's making loud noises or strange clicking, grinding noises, if you can't see certain files and folders that you know are on there, or you try to open them and they just don't open or give you messages that are like error messages, anything that seems really out of the ordinary might be a sign your hard drive is going to crash. So if you do think that's going to happen to you, don't do anything else. If you have any sense that your hard drive might crash, that something's weird with it, immediately shut it down if it has a power switch, or just unplug it if that's the way you turn it off, and don't touch it again until you can bring it to a data recovery specialist, which you should be able to Google data recovery specialist in your area and find somebody. This is just because messing around with it more can mess it up further if there is something wrong. To keep it healthy and to avoid these kinds of disasters, make sure you store any external hard drives away from dust and water pipes and any sort of extreme temperature situations. And if you do have 2 or more external hard drives, you want to consider storing them in separate locations. So think if some sort of disaster, natural disaster or building disaster destroyed one of your hard drives, where would the other one be safe so you still had your files? Okay, moving on from hard drives to cloud storage. So some of you may already be familiar with something like Dropbox or Google Drive, maybe like Microsoft OneDrive. There are multiple, these are cloud storage devices, and there are multiple of them on the market, and you may be familiar with them already. These are really great tools for collaborating with your team, but they aren't the best for a backup of your files. And there's a few reasons for this. One of them is that you have to manually put files on it. You can't set it up to happen automatically, which we'll talk more about in a second. They're also easily changed and edited. They're really built for collaborating with people. So you might think you have a backup of your files, but one of your colleagues goes in and edits the photo, and now you don't have it anymore. And because you're likely working with a limited amount of storage space when you're using these, and it can get expensive to get more storage space on something like Google Drive or Dropbox. So the good news is that there are other cloud-based services that will automatically back up your files for you on a regular schedule so that you don't have to worry about it. And they're not built for collaborating or sharing like you would use Google Drive or Dropbox. So I'm going to talk about one called Backblaze, and I promise I'm not being sponsored. I'm not being paid for this. It's just one that I've used and think works really well. It's great because you just pay one annual price and you get unlimited space. You get automatic backups, and you can access your files from any computer. So I really like Backblaze. It's a good option, but there are other options on the market. And if you want to do your own research, go for it. But if you'd like to invest in some cloud storage, this is one that I recommend. All right, let's talk really quickly about automatic backups. So the easiest way to make sure that your digital files are getting backed up is to put them on an automatic backup schedule. I don't have the time tonight to give you specific instructions on your computer or your hard drive's automatic backup, like the way you would go through that. But here, there are some resources for Mac users, Windows users, some links here, and a reminder, you will get this PowerPoint, so you'll have access to those links. And something to keep in mind as you're looking to set this up is that most of the time, you can choose if you want to back up your entire computer hard drive, or just certain folders. So different people will need to make different choices depending on your storage situation. Like if all your files are relevant to your organization or artistic work, maybe you just back up your whole computer, whereas if only certain folders are relevant, maybe you just back up those folders. So one dramatic slide here to bring your attention to some devices not to store your backups on. So do not back up your important files using optical media like CDs or DVDs or flash drives. So there's a few reasons for not using these for backups. They run out of space, they crash, they break, they get stepped on, they get lost, all sorts of things. These are really great devices for just sharing files. So like if you just need to give someone a copy of a dance that they want to see, don't feel like you can't use one of these. But they're just not for long-term backups of your files. And you may be curious what the difference between a flash drive and a hard drive really is. Essentially, it's a matter of storage space. So if you try to back up all your files on flash drives, you're probably going to end up needing a lot of flash drives. Whereas external hard drives, you can get one drive that will fit all your stuff. So if there is one thing that I hope you'll take away from this, it's to have a backup copy of your photos, your videos, your digital files that's not edited. So have another copy that you make your edits from, you send altered versions from, all of those things. And one little hint for you is that, remember when Imogen talked about file naming? You can consider putting the word master or use into the file name to indicate whether it's the copy that you're editing or whether it's the master copy that you're never editing. So really quickly, here's some example photos of what it might look like. So returning to our case study that Imogen showed you, here's what it might look like to have a master backup copy on the left and a use copy on the right. So you'll see here that the use copy on the right has the same photos as the master copy, but in the red circles, there are indications that the photo's been cropped or that there's a low resolution version or a grayscale version. So something like this might be what your two versions look like. Great, so why are we doing all of this? Why are we talking about this? It may seem labor and time intensive, but as Imogen mentioned, it is a huge investment in your future. So it will actually save you money and time in the long run. You won't have to hunt around so much for files. You'll save money on all that unnecessary storage space by knowing how much material you really have and how much storage it all takes up. And you'll be able to find files more easily in your system and in other people's, because hopefully you'll all be using the same system. And if someone leaves your org, their files aren't just completely lost in the chaos of their filing structure. Hopefully it's clear and the same as yours. And thinking really long term, if someday you decide to start an archiving project, whether that means partnering with a library or a cultural institution or keeping an archive of your work in-house, it'll be a lot easier to turn these really clearly labeled, organized files into an archive. So here is a slide with our contact info, which I think has also been scrolling throughout. Please do feel free to reach out to both of us if you have any questions about anything we've discussed tonight. We will also have some Q&A time. And yeah, we look forward to continuing this conversation with you. But now that we've had some time to sort of talk the nuts and bolts of this digital organization stuff, we have the great privilege to hear from someone who's actually done it and whose organization has really benefited from this digital organization. So we're going to be joined by Shipra Shukla, who went through this process with Chhandam. And I will turn it over to Shipra.
Thank you. Namaskar. My name is Shipra Shukla, and for 25 years I studied and trained in Kathak dance with Pandit Chitresh and was part of his organization, the Chitresh Dance Company and Chhandam School of Kathak. We'll now see just a few minutes of video from the Master of Tradition performance. Accidental archivist. Because I worked in broadcasting, I became the accidental archivist. This means over the years, I did everything from organize ephemera into acid-free boxes, to oversee digitizing efforts, to record video. After providing you with background, I'll describe 2 achievements: creating a library and moving assets to the cloud, both of which allowed Chhandam to better preserve and make accessible digital assets. Location of digital assets. Chitresh Das immigrated to America in 1970 and is recognized by dance critics and scholars as being instrumental in establishing Kathak in the United States. For as long as I knew him, I knew his philosophy to be rooted in the belief that anyone of any race, ethnicity, age, class, disability, gender, or sexual identification could learn Kathak. By 2010, a large collection comprising of digitized and born digital assets had amassed. These assets lived in a variety of places. They were spread out over a dozen hard drives in my house, in the dance company office, and with a local cinematographer, as well as in the cloud on places like Dropbox and Google Drive. Very often, the same digital file lived in multiple places with a different name. The living in multiple places was good. We wanted backups, but having it widely different names for the same file was confusing. Do you have that video? As the archivist, I'd get weekly requests for video or audio. People needed the media for a variety of different reasons, like wanting to watch a past performance to help them create new choreography, or needing footage of a recent class so they could edit a video together for a grant application. In rare instances, our work was profiled by non-dance organizations, as you'll see in this clip from Combating HIV Through Collaboration, UCSF's Advancing Health Worldwide film series. It showcases how organizations in India, including one of Chandam's partners who served the children of sex workers, use dance to incite individual change.
Way. And the fun that you have when you're exploring your body and you are making it do all these wonderful things in dance or in yoga, positive, uplifting, hopeful activities.
सब जो जिंदगी में आनंद नहीं होगा तो वो डिजीज कहिए और जो भी टेंशन कहिए कुछ नहीं क्लियर होगा. आनंद अपना जॉय, लेकिन जॉय ऐसा नहीं होने चाहिए. जॉय साधना के माध्यम में होने चाहिए. वो कथक योगा के माध्यम में हम लोग को उन लोगों को सिखाएगा. अपना गुरु को तुम अपना पहला समझा करो, तुम अपने को समझो आगे. सेल्फ अवेयरनेस अपना नाच के माध्यम में. शरीर के प्रति अपना जो ध्यान होने चाहिए, तो इस शरीर के प्रति जो ध्यान है इसी के माध्यम में अपना शांति मिलती है.
Do you have that video? Sometimes teachers wanted a music track that they would then pull into their own editing program to create a new track at a slower speed, which their beginning students could practice with. And in an effort to reach communities online, raw photo and video files were compressed so that they could be uploaded to Facebook or emailed. Any new edits or conversions made from the original were saved under whatever name the person who created the asset thought made sense. Many times, myself and others who worked with the media couldn't find an older performance we knew we'd seen on one of the drives. In the interest of time, we'd end up going back to the physical tape and paying a vendor who had the equipment to redigitize it. Sometimes our office would agree to a media request by committing to send someone like a local TV producer one of our edited promotional trailers. The person in the office would look for the trailer on our drives and cloud platforms only to discover they couldn't find it. We would then end up going back to the editor we hired to ask for and pay for another copy of the promotional trailer they had edited. By 2010, I was also filming more, not just concerts and workshops, but classes, meetings, outreach events, and more. I'm glad I did it because it was an important chronicling of history. However, filming more also meant more footage. Creation of the library. As Imogen mentioned earlier, all digital recording devices automatically assign a number to a piece of media. For Chhandam, this meant the video clips with hard to decipher numerical names started to pile up. Although I'd placed these files in folders with a name that described the clip, like India Jazz Suites, it didn't make it much easier to find a particular clip, because something like India Jazz Suites was a production that toured over many years in multiple locations. When someone would ask me if they could see a video I myself had shot, I dreaded the thought of having to look through my drives to find it. While the collection was archived through digital form and copies lived in multiple locations, it was disorganized, and this left it vulnerable to loss. To illustrate what Hallie described about digital files getting lost, there was a time when late one night, I needed to free up hard drive space in order to create a 2-minute promotional edit for a grant application. Without more space, I couldn't create the edit, so something needed to be deleted. I accidentally deleted master footage of a house concert in India by a company dancer. I was confused by the file folder's name and thought I was deleting a duplicate. I was certain a copy existed on one of my other drives and a drive in the office. Unfortunately, there was no copy, and the footage was permanently lost. I knew we needed some type of system to be able to identify each asset and know where to look for it. Before trying to come up with my own rendition of the Dewey Decimal System, I decided to sit with the footage. While I was very familiar with the performances, I never usually went back after filming to look at footage of something like Chitresh Das's birthday or B-roll of promotional signs on a Muni bus and billboards on Highway 101. I opened up these and all the other video clips, watching them to see if I could get a feel for what made them important and sense if there was an overarching theme between them. Grouping. Through my work in broadcasting, I was exposed to how production companies managed their assets. I learned they incorporated the clips with the assigned recording device name into an accessible system. While Chandam's digital assets included audio, photo, and documents like scans of promotional material, it was video heavy, with almost 75% of the assets being comprised of video. I began by clumping the video clips into groups. I wanted to create useful category names that describe the content at a high level. If an interview took place backstage, it was more important that someone accessing the media in the future be able to first search for and find the interview. The fact that it took place backstage after a particular concert was incidental in my overarching naming system. In a process that took several months, I created the library. I had large Post-it notes all over my home office with possible category names listed on them. These had smaller Post-it notes underneath them that further described a category. At one point, I had 16 categories, but eventually I got it down to 10. I'd come up with a name and then sit with it for several weeks. Then I'd rework it. For instance, the concert category could have been called performance, but I liked that concert was a shorter word and thereby more conducive to labeling assets. Library categories. These are the 10 categories that made sense for Chhandam. Any asset we had could be placed into one of these categories. The 10 main category names became the names of file folders, and within these folders was a subcategory. India Jazz Suites would go under the concerts category. I then took a long time to define each category. Category definitions. Again, you'll be receiving the slides, so don't worry if you can't read the small print here. The definitions were very important because they served as a roadmap for how I, and now others, decided what category an asset fell into. They needed to make logical sense for the organization. As you can see, the definitions were specific to how Chhandam thought of and used the assets. Folders. Here is a view of the file structure of the library. The category folders are first divided by year. An earlier year, like 1985, consists of few category folders, mainly just concerts, while later years include all 10 category folders. Cloud migration. The library was instrumental in demonstrating to Chhandam's leadership and board that we had a robust organizing system. This and the death of Pandit Das in 2015 motivated them to seek out funding to support a large-scale digitization effort that I will describe in the next workshop. By 2016, Chhandam had over 20 terabytes of media that needed to be preserved and accessed. External hard drives and consumer cloud platforms no longer met our needs. Using archival principles, Chhandam saved all their media, the master source or raw files, various viewable versions, and some edits. Archival principles, as Imogen mentioned, advocate saving everything because you never know what you'll need. A future documentary filmmaker might want to access raw files, while a teacher might need a compressed copy of a school show clip to share over social media. We needed to be able to transfer 20 terabytes to the cloud. This wasn't something that could be uploaded, regardless of how fast a connection we were on. Amazon AWS. A small team comprising of myself, another dancer, and an outside contractor were tasked with the effort of moving the digital assets to the cloud. As an aside, Chhandam briefly considered donating the entire collection to a library. However, because we were a working dance company, we wanted full access to our assets. We researched and evaluated a number of different options, including Dropbox Professional and Microsoft Azure, but decided to go with Amazon AWS. Amazon asked us to work through one of their partners, Cloud Nexa. With their support, we moved the media from dozens of hard drives, as well as Dropbox and Google Drive, to Amazon's cloud, specifically AWS Glacier, through their new data transport device called the Snowball. At the time, this was new technology for Amazon altogether. And although they normally work with better resourced, larger nonprofits, we found Amazon, as well as Microsoft, were very interested in working with us. According to Amazon, Chhandam was one of the first mid-sized nonprofit organizations in the country to successfully make such a large transfer to the cloud. Support and autonomy. The project was successful in part because Chandam's leadership afforded me a fair bit of autonomy. There were no meetings to decide on category names. They trusted me to come up with a system. And although much of the archiving work I did was on a voluntary basis, for some of it I was paid. Also, the leadership respected my suggestions on which vendors to hire. The autonomy and support, both financial and emotional, are what allowed the project to succeed. In conclusion, the simple library categories based around a folder structure mean the media is organized today, and the cloud, with no limits on how much can be stored, lets people in different locations access the media. What the library didn't capture was institutional knowledge, like the names of all the dancers and musicians in a photo or video. However, now that the library has been created and all the media is stored in one place, the person who's handling archiving today is able to address this issue by creating a spreadsheet that captures this knowledge. In the future, the spreadsheet and library can be developed into a searchable database that connects to the media. I'll leave you with a short video of company dancers performing Panchajati before we take your questions.
Thank you so much, Shipra.
Thank you.
Wow, it was so amazing to see those videos of Pandit Chitresh and all the wonderful, wonderful students and dancers that he's trained. What a wonderful archive project. Now we're gonna go to questions, and we're gonna bring other panelists on. All right, take a look at. All righty. There's a question from Dudley. Your sample file name uses underscores. Are we likely to encounter any organization whose computers cannot handle spaces in file names?
It is generally not recommended to use spaces in file names. It can lead things to not file correctly. So yes, we would generally recommend that you use underscores rather than using spaces. There are some other characters that are not recommended to use, and those are listed in the toolkit.
It's often a problem of software. So like spaces sometimes can cause problems for certain computer softwares. So that's why in general underscores are used.
Thank you, thank you. All right, let's take a look to see if there's any other questions. Another question about, well, I guess for all three speakers, do you have any thoughts or sample about how an organization's core values might influence archiving practices?
Shipra, I feel like it would be great to hear from you about that, because I think this is probably something you thought about as you were going through creating your categories and your whole archive project.
Yeah, I think when I was approaching it, because I was dealing with videos that were coming off of people's phones and photos that people had sent or had been scanned, it was very important to keep it high level and to not focus so much on the actual content of the picture or the video, but more about what it was. So it was a concert, regardless of whether that concert took place in someone's garage or at Zellerbach. Those were all concerts that got lumped into a certain category, and that kind of fit. It fit with the values. Or if something was teaching, teaching took place in a classroom, but teaching also took place outside of the classroom. It could take place, in a cafe where we might be, reciting certain thals on our hands. and somebody may have captured that on their phone. That went under the class category, or for lack of a better word, I picked class rather than teaching. But it all fell into these large overarching categories, and that I felt like was in line with the organization's values.
Great.
Yes, that's great. That's a great example. Yeah, I mean, I am thinking of things like, if outreach and sort of community work is a particularly core value for an organization, then maybe trying to make sure that you are collecting records of the context and who is the community you're working with, and what are the responses, and what are the impacts on that community, and how can you actually be documenting that in your archive rather than simply documenting maybe what you presented. So that would be a way that you might think about linking up your archiving practices, and then that would include how you're naming things to ensure that presence of the community is actually represented in the archive.
Yeah, in very similar vein to what Imogen is saying, like, things may not be the most apparent to you as things that need to be saved, but when you really get down and think about your organization's activities, you may figure out, like, oh, we spend a lot of time on education. We have a school as part of our organization, or we offer a lot of classes, but most of our files are just performances. So that may be a time for you to think about, like, what are we just like throwing away class registration lists? Are we throwing away the promotional materials from our classes and not saving that material? If someone took a video in class, is that in our files? So like if you notice that the files you're keeping aren't the same thing as the stuff your organization is putting a lot of time into, it might be a place to think about.
Great. We have another question from Nirupama, sorry, about audio files, actually. Should audio files for dance music follow similar principles? Any thoughts? Interesting question. Just music, audio files.
That is an interesting question. I think so. I guess there are going to be different types of audio files for a lot of companies. Some may be music that was created, by an artist unrelated to the organization that you purchased or gotten the rights to use, whereas others might be original. So there might be some slight differences, but in terms of the principles of naming files, absolutely. The file naming principles will always apply to like all of your digital stuff, no matter what. You may have to develop a system that kind of indicates the slight differences between files like that, especially there's all sorts of rights issues with music, so you may have to sort of file them maybe separately depending on your use of them, but definitely have clear folder names, have clear file names for them that are the same, that you use the same way, so that when you go to find them, you can. Great. We have another question here that from Valerie that I think is on the minds of many folks in our community, especially longtime dance companies. When you donate digital files to a museum or library, how do you decide the best destination? Do you need to also include funding for maintenance? Yes, War Arts West wants to know that, as well as Valerie.
That is a great question. To take your second question first, you should not need to include funding just to get your collection into a library to ensure that it will be processed and maintained. However, whether you are at the front of the line to get processed, or you're going to have to wait your turn in line, that's where, if you can provide funding or you can get a grant that would provide funding, you can kind of jump ahead in the queue sometimes in terms of having the library do that work, whether it's digitizing or just processing and describing your collection. So, but in general, no. the library will not expect you to provide funding. In terms of how to find the best place, I mean, that's a kind of big question. We would encourage you to reach out to us if you'd like to have a longer conversation, because this is something Hallie and I talk to people about very often. There are questions about what is the best fit in terms of the mission and the collections that a library has. If it's, for instance, very meaningful to you that you are based in the Bay Area, maybe you want to make sure that it goes to, a local library. If it's important to you to be with other certain types of collections because, of a certain cultural focus, or you want to make sure your materials are living with other dance materials, that might be a different place. So there's partly the fit, the overall focus of the place. And then there are just a bunch of questions that you should ask when you approach the library. Ask them, what they can offer in terms of, for instance, will they be able to digitize your, videos or whatever else is important to you. Also, you want to ask them, what are they going to do to raise the visibility of your collection? Do they have ideas for using it in programming? Whatever is really important to you, just ask. A library will expect to have that conversation with you. So it can just be exploratory. If you reach out to a library, it doesn't have to mean they think you're giving them your stuff. Definitely. It can just be, I'd like to have a conversation if you're interested. And then you ask them these questions, and you can ask them things like, how long do you think it's going to take you to process my collection after it's donated? And they'll give you an honest answer. If it's going to be 2 years or whatever, they'll tell you that. So, but just think for yourself about what's really important to you to know that your materials are going to get, and then ask the library what they can provide.
And you can feel free to reach out to multiple
Absolutely
institutions. So don't feel like you have to commit to one. You can develop relationships and communicate with multiple institutions.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, as we wrap up, we have one last question. Shipra, what is your biggest takeaway from this experience? You've been doing this archive project since 2004, right? Yeah.
I think the biggest takeaway, as was mentioned earlier, is to just get started. When we first thought about this in Chhandam, we wanted a system where it would be like Google. You could put in a name and the video would pop up. But that wasn't going to happen right away. That wasn't really going to happen until we did the steps before it, like organizing the media. And today someone's creating a spreadsheet to capture the details about the media. And then maybe one day a database will link to the videos. So I think the biggest takeaway is just get started.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to conclude by saying this is our very first archive partnership workshop with Dance USA. Dance USA has been giving archive workshops for a while, and this is your first archive workshop for the traditional dance community, right? So we're just so excited to partner with you. We are speaking with Dance USA on offering our community a series of dance workshops. So for everybody watching, please remember to fill out your workshop survey. Your input will help us make decisions on what kinds of workshop offerings to bring you in the future. And if you enjoyed tonight's program, please consider making a donation to World Arts West and Dance USA. Please also go to worldartswest.org to sign up on our mailing list and receive notification about the 2021 Ethnic Dance Festival, Living Traditions Season 3, and our other programs. We want to thank Imogen, Hallie, Shipra for joining us tonight. So wonderful, wonderful to have your presence. Hey, Sonia Hapina, our magician behind the scenes who made the program so wonderful tonight. And we want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. We really, really look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.